Hi everyone that's joining us. We're just letting everybody in and then we'll get started in a moment.
Familiar names there, that list. Lovely to see. And some unfamiliar names, which is really fantastic too.
Just letting everybody get logged in. We've got a couple of people still joining. Fab. I think we can get started because the time always goes really quickly. Hi everyone, my name's Amy from One Dance UK. I'm just going to briefly hand over to Peter initially to speak about Safer Dance and then we'll get started with the lunchtime conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Welcome to everyone who's here in person and is watching the recording as well. I'm Peter Flew. I'm the chair of Safer Dance, which is also called the Dance School Safeguarding Working Group, a group that was created 5 years ago now by people interested in safeguarding in the dance school sector who realised that there was nowhere for people to speak, to share resources, where one dance group was trying to be better than the other. It's all about sharing information. I'm a professor of leadership in education, currently working in a higher education provider across the UK. But I was at Roehampton University, which is quite famous for its dance degrees, as well as teacher education as well. As Safer Dance said, it's been going for 5 years. We are members of the Department for Education's Out of School Settings Safeguarding Group, so we lobby government there. We create little think pieces for our website. If you look at our website, you'll see some of those. And we have a whole host of lunchtime conversations. And this is our latest one. So I'd like to welcome Professor Jenn Cumming, and I'll let Amy introduce her.
Yeah, so really pleased that Jennifer could join us today. Jennifer works at University of Birmingham as a professor of sport and exercise psychology. And this lunchtime is going to be talking all about the 2025 National Survey of Safeguarding and Abuse Prevention Policies in UK Dance. So yeah, she knows much more about that than I can share in this introduction. So I'll hand straight over to Jen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And let me just share my slides. Right, which should be coming up now. Hopefully you can see them. Brilliant. Okay, great. And thank you so much for the invitation to join you for this lunchtime chat and be able to share with you some of the most recent results from the national survey, which took place this past early summer, really. And we've been analyzing the data and trying to present that over the last few months. And hopefully within this session today, it'd be great to get some of your sort of thoughts and ideas around the findings, but also in terms of its implications in terms of when we are lobbying government, etc. What can we put forward as some recommendations that would really help you to make sure that this evidence is getting into practice. So let me first start by just my slide's not progressing. There we go. Let me first start by just explaining how we view safeguarding within the research that we do, and hopefully that aligns nicely with your own sort of thoughts. So we look at it both from a protection aspect in terms of what are the actions needed to protect dancers and anybody in the dance environment from abuse, harm, neglect, maltreatment, but also from a very proactive efforts around supporting their health, their well-being, and their human rights. So this is the broad view that we take around safeguarding within the work that we do. And we know in dance you'll be very familiar with some of these kind of media stories, these sort of headlines. It brought the attention to maltreatment and harm in dance to the forefront. But we also know that these media stories really don't give the nuance behind the story. And it's also not telling us all the actions that are currently being taken by organizations to improve things. And so one of the things that we've done is try to create a call to action around this from a research perspective. We know you're working really hard to have these kind of conversations, and how can we offer support to that? One way we can do that is to try to articulate the need for it. And so one of the things we did was publish a viewpoint back in 2024, where we called action for both research as well as policy practice emphasizing that there was good practice happening. How could we pull that together and offer that as a resource to the sector, but also providing the evidence in order to make sure that policy action could take place. And so that was something we did early in 2024. But actually the work started long before that. So back in, I think, 2020, Erin and I were starting to have conversations around what were kind of important areas of research that was needed within dance, and how could we help support that. And so actually one of the first things that we did early on was develop collaborative and co-produced research. And back in 21, we ran the first national survey on safeguarding and abuse prevention. And many of you would have either taken sort of part in the survey, maybe even gave feedback on the survey, for which I'm really grateful for that. And as a result, we can truly say that the research that we've been doing is research that's been designed with and for UK dance. Because I think the goal for the kind of work that I do is always to make sure it's meaningful, that it's contextually relevant, so it makes sense for the real realities of what dance is like in the UK. And because we don't do this to do research on, but really to be able to support and ensure that any of the evidence that we're gathering can truly inform safeguarding policies and practices. So just to give you an overview, this is the research we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years. So it started with the national survey back in 21. We've also done interviews with dancers, organizational leads. Back in 2024, we also ran a sandpit, which some of you may have been a part of that, where we're starting to get a feel for how could sort of bigger changes take place, what would be needed. And what led on from that was a scoping review, where we start to look at the risk and protective factors of abuse and maltreatment in dance. And hopefully that will be published very soon. Then we realized that a lot had happened in the last 4 years within the UK dance ecology around safeguarding. So it probably made sense to run the survey again to see what was the change in the landscape. Could we start to capture that? And we also ran a review of publicly available safeguarding policies, so we could start to see whether what was being reported in the survey is also what we were picking up on in the actual policies that were made available. And then more recently, we've been running focus groups with clinicians, dance scientists, people who have been working in the field to get a good sense around their experiences with safeguarding, their recommendations as well in terms of how to advance that. So just to kind of give you an overview of the work that we've been doing so that we can have multiple sources of evidence. But what I wanted to cover today was some aspects of the second national survey, where we are in particular looking at the policies of UK dance organisations. And we've mapped these to 8 safeguarding pillars in order to help identify what we call like a policy indicator score. But essentially what it is, it's like a diagnostic checklist. It's almost like a tool that organizations can use to help look at what's going well, but also maybe areas that they can identify for improvement. And we also picked up on that survey too, was some of the main safeguarding concerns that organizations were seeing, and then to the extent to which they feel that they could address these. So that's the bits I'll look at today. Let's ignore that one and have a look at who responded. So interestingly, both surveys in 2021 and 2025 had almost identical in terms of the number of participants, which was around 70. So this time there was 71 respondents, so representing a breadth of organizations. When we look at the role that the respondent occupied, most were in some kind of leadership role, so head teacher, principal director, designated safeguarding lead. And that sort of fit what we were looking for, which is people who had an understanding of safeguarding within the organization. But the organization type, it really ranged. So there was schools, private dance schools, vocational training schools, professional companies, but also people working in freelance capacities as well. So quite it really shows the kind of diversity of dance within the UK. But across the board, almost 96% of the respondents had some kind of safeguarding training, which is encouraging. It also suggests that those filling out the survey also had some good background knowledge on this. But what we also found was that there's a lot of variance in the type of training that people were doing and the amount of training and how often they were being trained. So although probably about half of the respondents are getting trained every year or every 2 years, there's a good chunk are only having training as a single one-off. But also when we look at the type of training, most will be doing it in some kind of interactive way, whether it's face-to-face or online. But there's also almost a third that are doing it as a kind of e-learning, self-paced. And when we look at the length of training that people are doing, again, almost half are doing it as a very short course, so like less than 3 hours. So it's something just to kind of reflect on for ourselves is around the variation in safeguarding training, particularly those who are occupying kind of leadership roles, who are kind of leading the charge on safeguarding, and is something for us to kind of maybe reflect on for moving forward. In terms of the policy framework, what we did is we had a look at policy frameworks that were most relevant, and we used the one for the Council for Europe. There's a large project going on around safe sport. And as part of that project, they developed a safeguarding indicator, policy indicator, using these 8 pillars. We adapted this to dance to ensure that the language and the context was relevant. And as a result of these 8 pillars, the first 4 of them, which you see on the slide, they kind of represent the foundation of safeguarding policy. So this is whether organizations have a policy framework, whether they have procedures for responding to safeguarding concerns in place. Do they have processes around offering advice and support? Do they take risk management within their practice of safeguarding, so minimizing risk to dancers? And on each of these pillars, you see an example just to show the relevance in terms of dance. The other 4 pillars relate more to getting the kind of the culture around safeguarding right for that organization. So it'll be things like, are there guidelines for behaviors such as like a code of conduct? Is there things in place around safer recruitment, training, and communication, such as everyone involved in the organization, whether it's the staff or the volunteers, have they had DBS checks? Working with partners. So this would be external partners, such as local authorities, it'd be awarding bodies, it would be charities, in order to help further safeguarding practices within that organization. And then the 8th one is monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So just to have a look then at some of the responses for each item on the survey. Participants were asked to say to what extent this measure activity was in place. So if they said no or wasn't applicable, then what we did is we assigned that a score of 0. If they said that the activity or measure across these 8 pillars was initiated or partially implemented, we gave it a score of 1. And then if they said yes, it was fully implemented, then we gave it a score of 2. So then across all the pillars, because there's different number of items per pillar, what we have is a total possible score of 158. So there are 79 items. So if you scored 2 on every single item, you could have a total score of 158. But for each of the different pillars, you could get a different score based on the number of items. So you can see on the far right-hand side is the maximum points for each of the pillars. And this, again, is just to kind of give it a bit of almost like a scorecard, a diagnostic tool, a way of kind of getting a good overview of areas of strengths, but also then maybe areas for improvement and where to target, both within an individual organization, but then also as a sector. So let's have a look at the responses. So on this slide, what you see on the left-hand side is a figure which ranks the pillars from the lowest to the highest. So pillar 8, which is the monitoring, learning, evaluation one, has the overall lowest score. So it means on average, just under half of the kind of the activities measures are being implemented around this. Where on the far end, you see pillar 4, which is almost 90% of it being on average implemented by organizations. So we can see that there's some real strengths here. Of course, I'll give you the caveat though, that people who respond to the survey are likely already engaged in safeguarding. So this is probably an optimistic, positive view of the sector. On the right-hand side is the lowest score that we saw versus the highest score. So the lowest score was 18 out of 158, and that was for a private dance school. Whereas the best score, there was one university scored the full 158 points. And that I think really reflects the differences across the sector in terms of how people have access to resource around safeguarding. As we know with private dance schools, it could be led by one person where the sole responsibility for the school is on their shoulders, and will have less access to the structures and support compared to someone in a university where they already have access to maybe legal frameworks, etc., already built in place. So it's a lot easier to maybe implement across the 8 pillars. But overall, the average for the sector who responded to the survey, it was 76.2%. So pretty, if we had to define that, it's almost like 3/4 of the safeguarding measures are being implemented within policies across the organizations that responded. Now, this is just to give you a visual. So what we've done is done a bit of a RAG rating. So red, amber, green in terms of the areas of strengths and areas for improvement. So the ones in green are the top scoring. So pillars 1, 2, 4, and 5 all scored basically 80% and over. And so we can see that the foundation of safeguarding is pretty much there for most organizations. They've got the policy framework. They have some procedures for responding to safeguarding concerns. They're minimizing risks. They're looking at guidelines for behavior. Whereas amber is sort of our mid-range, where there's probably some areas for improvement. So that would be around giving advice and support. This is for recruiting, training, and communicating, and then working with partners. So those are the 3 sort of mid-range areas. And then our weakest area, which I already mentioned, which is the one we put in red, which is monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And that's because just under half of the activities measures are being put in place. So for example, one of the ones for monitoring, evaluation that scores particularly the lowest is having accountability around how you review policies and making that information, for example, available publicly. So this is overall the items from the monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So you can see at the top, which is the weakest one, publishing, monitoring, evaluation data publicly is the lowest scoring one. And then up towards the top, has a person responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of safeguarding guidelines and policies, which is likely usually the designated safeguarding lead within the organization. But this is just to kind of give you a sense of the types of things that fall under this category. And this is just about being able to learn from the policies, what's working, what's not working, having a way to show that kind of accountability that the organization is doing that, so that there's a record, it shows like what changes have been made as a result of that, and so on. Right. So moving on to some of the open-ended questions that we asked the dance organizations. So we had some items in there where we asked organizations what were the types of safeguarding harms issues they were seeing. Now, 50 of the organizations responded to these ones, and we constructed themes based on their answers. So there's 3 different themes. One is around maltreatment and harm in the dance environment. One is on mental health and the emotional well-being of dancers. And the third was around family and external sources of harm. So this is where I'll get into some specific examples of abuse and harm, just to kind of foreshadow that in case there's any, as a bit of a content warning for everyone. The first theme is maltreatment and harm in the dance environment. And so these were things the organizations were seeing that were perpetrated by either dance staff or actually by dance peers. So these were things like physical, sexual, psychological, emotional abuse, as well as peer-on-peer abuse, so bullying, online bullying, And also that fell within this, because it falls within the dance environment, were issues around accessibility, exclusion, whether it's for disability, neurodiversity, but also there was items around racism that came up within these open-ended comments. The second theme has to do with the mental health and emotional well-being of dancers, and organizations were noting that they were seeing high-risk psychological behaviors. So, we won't be surprised to see things like eating disorders listed here, but self-harm came up quite a few times. And from other research that we're doing, we are well aware that self-harm is a significant issue that organizations are facing within dance. They were also mentioning suicide attempts, drug abuse. And then in terms of maybe like lower level but risk around these high risk psychological behaviors would be emotional distress and vulnerability that organizations were seeing. So these were things like anxiety, panic attacks, depression, low confidence, and low self-esteem. So important nevertheless, because we know when these indicators of ill-being are present, it does put people more at risk for those behaviors that you see on the row above. So the third theme is around familial and external sources of harm. And what this really shows is that dancers are bringing a lot into the environment that's impacting them there, and organizations are picking up on this. Front and center, probably one of the most frequently mentioned, was around inappropriate parental behavior. So having to manage parents, where the parents might be pushy, they might be ignoring weight issues, they might be also putting pressure on their children to not follow advice around injury prevention, or maybe they're pushing them to overtrain. But we're also seeing things like the abuse and adversity that dancers are experiencing at home, such as having a parent with a mental illness, experience of domestic violence, loss of a parent, children showing signs of neglect or abuse from home, and again, bring that into the dance environment. Other types of harm were related to online social media. So that was more specific to seeing inappropriate imagery. And then the last one was harassment. So harassment, which was mainly in public spaces and public transport. So dancers being harassed, for example, on the way to dance class. So this is just to give you a sense of, this is responses by 50 organizations, and this is really the issues they were seeing over like the last 12 months. So these are probably the key trends that we're seeing in the sector around safeguarding issues. So we did ask organizations to what extent they had the capacity to respond, to be able to refer, record, and so on, these kind of concerns. And over half said yes, they did have the capacity, where just over a third said partially, but only 6% said no, they didn't have this capacity, which is also encouraging and reassuring. But we also then asked how many safeguarding issues were raised over the last 12 months. And there was a lot of variability in this. So for some organizations, they said none, they had none raised. And then as many as 20 in other organizations. So a total across the 50 that responded to this was 136 safeguarding issues raised. But then we also looked at how many of these issues were then reported. And what we see is a reporting rate of about 27.9%. So what that means is that only 38 of the 136 were actually reported. And the main reason that was given, although we didn't ask for a reason, people did offer a reason, which is that it didn't meet threshold. And so that kind of raises some questions around understanding of what's threshold and how to make use of external sources of support around safeguarding concerns such as local authorities and charity partners, awarding bodies, and so on. And altogether, what the research is telling us across all the bits of data that we've been collecting is that policies alone are not going to be enough to fully ensure safer dance. And one of the things that we're trying to help promote is that the dance ecology is a complex one. So on this slide, you see sort of an attempt to illustrate how complex it is. So obviously at the very center, we've got the dancer themselves, but then all around that is all the different interactions they have in the environments that you know, whether it's dance, school, home, healthcare settings, and so on. And how, as we move further and further out, there is our dance culture, there are the laws that are in place, the statutory guidelines, there's the recommendations, etc. There's the social beliefs and values in place. All of this wrapped up together influences the experiences that a dancer has in terms of being safe in dance. And so to truly make changes, we have to think about things at all the different levels of this complex dance ecology, and then how this changes over time, because some of the safeguarding issues we're seeing in 2025 weren't as big back in 2021. You know, things do evolve all the time, and as policies and practices change, so does our approach to safeguarding. So one of the things I was hoping to pick your brains about and get some feedback on today is that we have opportunities to convey policy recommendations. In fact, I've got an opportunity this week. There's a member on the expert panel for DCMS who has taken a real interest to this work because he happens to have a daughter who is a dancer and has experience within dance, where realizing that safeguarding is actually really important. And so he's willing to bring forward some of these policy recommendations to DCMS this week, because I think they're having a meeting of their expert advisory panel. So there's a real, I think, a policy window that's opening for us to be able to seize it and grab it and make some changes. And I don't know if you might have seen the news that Deborah Bull is putting her name in the ring to be, is it the chair, head of Lords? I don't remember the exact title. So to have a former professional dancer, perhaps in a real leadership position within the House of Lords, is a moment we can potentially seize and try to get across some key policy recommendations. So some of the things that sort of make sense from the data that we've been collecting are looking at how we can make annual safeguarding audits something that all organizations are doing. It's good practice. It's what's recommended. All organizations should, in theory, be reviewing their policies and practices around this on an annual basis and making that information public. But from our data, we can see that there's a gap. There's a gap in this. There's work being done with the National Institute for Dance Medicine Science, and Erin's here on this call. We're looking at a best practice charter. And so one of the things I think we can really start to look at is, can we establish some kind of national safeguarding quality mark that's recognizable, that organizations can use to demonstrate that they've achieved a standard of safeguarding, and they can make that visible, they can make that public. And it's something then through education, we can start to encourage parents and dancers themselves to start to see how organizations stand apart through their work on safeguarding. Another one that comes out from our data is the need to clarify reporting thresholds and the procedures around that. Like, for example, if a safeguarding issue arises, organizations should be reporting that within 24 hours. And that's something maybe we're not seeing, and maybe that understanding hasn't pulled through organizations yet. We also have done some work around, as I said, a scoping review, trying to understand risk and protective factors across that system that I showed you. And one of the things that we can really see is that there's not many like levers at a national regulation level to really create that kind of momentum to ensure that safeguarding is done consistently, widely across the whole of the UK dance ecology. So one of the questions we had is whether there could be some way to link funding to evidence of safeguarding implementation. So for example, through the Arts Funding Council, we know they're already doing this for museums, for example. So I've got a colleague who works in law and specializes in museums and does a lot of work with the Arts Funding Council. And when museums came under that, one of the things they put in place were certain things that museums had to do in order to achieve their funding. So is this something that could be possible? Now, I'm aware that not all dance organizations get Arts Funding Council money, but could this be at least a starting point? And then a fifth recommendation is around being able to promote inclusive, trauma-informed, and participatory safeguarding. And what I mean by that is we think it's really important that when we come at safeguarding, we come at it from a strength-based perspective, that it isn't just about looking at what's wrong, but also looking at what's going well. How can we build on this? But also from a perspective that safeguarding should include everybody in the system. So we wouldn't want to be in a position where policy and practices around safeguarding are being done for dancers without their perspective being included, because when we've seen that happen in sport. So sport has moved really far ahead in safeguarding, but they left athletes' voice out of it. And so then what's happened is that athletes have felt that the safeguarding practices haven't actually met their needs. They have felt that, in fact, there's been new harms that have been introduced because their perspectives weren't included in the process. So I think we can learn from that and try to avoid that by ensuring that we bring our dancers, bring our parents, bring our other kind of key shareholders into the conversations and make this process participatory as much as possible. Trauma-formed also includes being strength-based, but it recognizes that abuse, harm, maltreatment will have trauma implications, and that can impact on people's thoughts, behaviors, interactions. And so we can come at it from a more sensitive perspective when we are trauma-informed. So those are just some of the recommendations that we've been thinking about. And as I said, I'd love to get your feedback on that. And just to highlight that we've also been trying to put resources in place as a result of the research that we've been doing. So we've been creating infographics, we've been writing blog posts, we've also been trying to create talks and presentations to kind of get out there, whether it's on a specific topic like self-harm, or more broadly like the one I've given to you today. Just trying to really work with you as a sector to ensure that the research is being translated directly into knowledge, not kind of being held up by that publication process. Often there's a long delay before kind of research reaches everyone widely. So we feel really strongly that we don't have to wait with research. We need to get that out there as soon as possible. So we do that through our Sprint Project website, as well as through sessions like today. And just to kind of conclude with a few thoughts. So this data that I showed you is actually just one part of the survey. There's a lot more data there. And it really is, again, a snapshot. So 2021 gave us our first snapshot, and I see that as a baseline. 2025 is our follow-up. And we're seeing some progress, some change, but actually a lot of stability. So what we haven't seen is huge direction of travel within the sector. So again, maybe some thoughts around why not, what are the barriers, are there things that we can do to help through a research perspective to enable that progress. I've already mentioned how organizations who respond to these kind of surveys and participate in our interviews and come along to our sound pits and to sessions like today are probably already really engaged in safeguarding. How do we reach the ones who are not? That's a question that is also on my mind. So I really feel that we don't have the full picture yet, and how can we engage more fully? So for example, we know with the survey, the vast majority of participants are from England. We can get a handful from Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland, we tried our best, but we didn't get a single organization again. And that's almost identical to the 2021 profile of participants as well. We think multi-level collaboration is needed, and we're seeing that. And this type of working group is a really great illustration of that. And we think that in order to really make change, we do need that collective voice for action to take place. And I already mentioned around the need for participatory, but also strength-based safeguarding approaches, because without that, I truly think that any kind of recommendations for regulatory reform might get it wrong because it's missing the key voices, and we can really learn from the mistakes that sport has made and the things that have gone well in sport around this. And finally, guys, just to say that safeguarding policy, the danger is that it just lives on paper, but we know that it has to be lived, it has to be experienced in life for it truly to have the benefits that it can be. So thank you very much for listening. And I just want to end with a big thank you, because this kind of research doesn't happen alone. I might be the one sharing the findings with you, but there's so much behind this from our collaborators, our co-production groups, our funders, and without Erin Sanchez, who actually started this whole area of research by giving the idea, by saying this was what was critical, this is the research that was needed in this area, we wouldn't have done this work. So thank you very much to all involved with the process so far, whether it's been given feedback on the surveys or on the findings, or now I'm asking for help with the policy recommendations. Many thanks for that. So I will stop it there and stop sharing as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Jen. And as Jen said, please feel free to share your thoughts. So you can either type in the webinar chat box at the bottom, or if you've got a specific question that you'd like to ask, there is a Q&A box as well. I think I'm right in saying, Jen, you're going to share the slides afterwards that can be sent out
Yeah.
too, with all the kind of links and things in. Um, got a couple of comments coming through, which I think you can probably see, but I'll share anyway. A really useful report. The recommendations and conclusions provide plenty of food for thought. So I think it's really interesting to think about how many of the respondents are already kind of, like you say, how do we reach the ones that aren't engaged in those safeguarding practices? Like, how do we get to those people to give the real full picture? Um,
Yeah, agreed.
Can I ask a question, please, Jen? One of the comments was about having some kind of badge to say that you're really good at safeguarding. It's something that we've talked about in the early days of Safe Adults, whether that's something we could do. And we're an organisation without even a bank account. We are simply a collection of people. So we sort of looked at some of the models, like the martial arts have created something similar, but it's a lot of work, and I suppose a bit like a DBS check. It's a snapshot at a particular time. What do you think the role of some of the awarding bodies who register teachers have in things like that?
Yeah,
Sorry, can I just say I'm a trustee of the Royal Academy of Dance, just to full disclosure.
I think it's a really, really good question. And I think that's something with the National Institute for Dance Medicine and Science. They've been looking at developing a best practice charter for the last couple of years, which Erin has linked to there in the chat if anybody wants to check that out. Now, the best practice charter covers lots of different aspects, not just safeguarding, but safeguarding will definitely fit in that. So I think there's already work being done on this. So I don't think that a working group like this necessarily has to undertake that. However, supporting it would be really important. So I know there'll be those who are already pilot testing it for NIDMS. But then in terms of more more wider rollout and implementation, I think that there will be a call out to help make sure that happens. I think awarding bodies have definitely a role to play here. They're the institutions where there's some level of credibility, respect, and if an awarding body says this is important, this is necessary in order for you to call yourself a RAD school or an ITSD school, then I think that's when we're going to start to see more take up and implementation of it. The danger of having these things roll out without any kind of levers, then danger of not having the impact that it could potentially have. So I think and it's not just one. I think we all have to come together as a supporting group to say this is important. We want this to happen. What can we do within our organizations to promote it? What can we do within our organizations to help provide both the carrot, but also maybe a little bit of the stick in terms of if organizations aren't fulfilling safeguarding, what is it that we can do to really show that there's some kind of quality mark here, that if you're going to be a RAD school or an ITSD school, you actually are demonstrating that not just in the quality of your teaching, but you're demonstrating that through how you manage risks and safeguarding. Yes. Are you in conversation? Yes, of course. I'm in conversation with Pip and Lucy. I was actually part of their co-production group for their policy recommendations and gave a talk at their recent symposium. So absolutely very aware of the wonderful work that they're doing as well. It's really important that we have multiple researchers working on this. This work area is so big. The number of people working in sport on safer sport research is vast, and it's across multiple countries. Dance is way behind. So in order to produce the evidence, we need lots of groups doing this kind of work. So absolutely, we're doing that in conversation with each other. Yes. Lots of comments coming through. Yeah, thanks, Erin, for sharing a link to Pip and Lucy's work as well. Yeah, so it's hopefully it's reassuring that the researchers are talking to each other, but also talking with you as well to ensure that the questions we're asking are we asking the right questions? Are we producing the evidence that you need? That's always very important to me. That's the starting point for all my research that I do.
It's just a few comments coming through in the chat as well. I know it's really hard to keep up with them as they come through. And we've got Neil Harrison from the British Dance Sport Association. They are saying that they published a national framework in July. It's been well received. And then also a comment around quality marks being a great idea, but monitoring being really key. It might miss some private dance schools, but not having that quality mark might help parents ask questions of those who don't have.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think we have to start somewhere. And I know we don't necessarily will get 100% organizations on board, but if can we create it to be the majority? Can we create the momentum where this becomes the norm rather than the exception? Can we create sort of public awareness around this so that when people are signing their children up to dance schools, in the same way when you're signing your children up through a sport, the safeguarding is front and center. My son's a diver, and one of the first emails we got from Swim England when he became a diver was a link to all their safeguarding policies and practices, which tells us right away that this is a high priority for that sport. I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a really good thing. So, for example, one of the signs that safeguarding is going well is we start to see an increase in safeguarding incidents going up because people are feeling more confident in reporting them. So that's always seen as a positive.
Is there any evidence that parents are starting to ask those questions? Because you say that Swim England told you about it, but when we originally set this group up, there wasn't much evidence that the parents are more swayed by what their children want to go to and their friends go to, rather than making those quick queries.
It's a really good question. I don't think that research has been done yet, but I wonder with organizations on the call if you're starting to see any questions being asked, and if you're not, that tells us we have a lot more work to be done on public awareness. What we might see is a bit of a lag from the media stories that have raised awareness that there could be harms in dance. But what we haven't seen pull through it is a lot more positive media stories about all the great things that dance is doing to address that. So the conversation in the public domain is probably not as fruitful as it could be to raise that awareness. So maybe that's something to for us all to think about as well, is how can we get out the positive examples? How can we make sure that that the messaging is getting out there, that safeguarding is happening in dance. There is movement being made. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
That's fab, thank you. I think I can't see any further questions or comments at the moment. Um, but I think for people watching the recording as well, if they might have questions, they might be able to share them with us via Safer Dance, and we can share them with you then as well, Jen.
Yeah, of course, that would be absolutely fine. And I'll share the slides with you as well so that you can circulate with the members. And I know not everybody could make the session today, but it's fantastic to have like a working group where you're having these kind of important conversations. And as I said, is there any, when we're doing this type of research, we really want to be hearing from you in terms of what the issues and challenges that you're facing, where research can help you. And when we're in a position to make recommendations, such as like, hopefully we'll be able to send something off this week so we can get to the advisory panel for DCMS, that we're doing all that we can to support you.
That's wonderful, thank you. I think if there's no further questions, then we can close the conversation there. It's been brilliant hearing all about it, and as we said, we'll share the slides with you and access to the recording afterwards. Peter, did you have any final words?
I just want to say thank you, Jen. Really interesting to sort of to see that there's proper research going on. to accompany all the work that individual dance schools are trying to do in this space. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you.